brain is always drenched in libido, right? What's weird is it's almost like the human wants to believe that all we need is rationality, because it's almost like it's safer. You have more control. And of course, it makes sense. That's the whole point. It makes sense to just be rational. Well, yes, because rationality sets the board by its own terms to where it makes sense to only be rational, because it only allows the data into itself of which would conclude that. It sets the board, right? So we end up in a kind of death drive, in the sense that we end up living according to a rationality that tells us what we need to do to then be alive, which actually defines being alive as deadening, of flattening. And that irony drive then, I think, helps us understand the meaning crisis. Because there's a lot of talk about the meaning crisis as a need to get back to religion, as a need to get back to spiritual practices. Ecologies of practices, Viveki will talk about. I do not in any way whatsoever say that is not true. I am not saying that. But you could return to religion and still be self-deceived. You could return to religion and still be operating according to a death drive. Because for Freud, the death drive is about getting back to the womb, right? Well, rationality kind of creates a womb. It creates a world that's stable and it's in control, and all you got to do is follow the mechanical steps and everything's good to go, right? So rationality, if you do not introduce it to non-rationality, is simulating a return to the womb, which then is why what I'll say, like, autonomous rationality is auto-cannibalistic, because what you're doing is creating a womb by actually kind of eating yourself. You're your womb, right? Which, of course, doesn't make any sense, and you end up kind of devouring yourself on the nutrition of your own brain, which means your brain is feeding off of itself and it dies. So what ends up happening is that the death drive is the rationality drive that seeks to think that all it needs is rationality, which then simulates a return to the womb, which of course then it defines as being fully alive, which is precisely to be dead in a deadening state, which is the meaning crisis. And if we don't understand this irony that is fundamental, because like our friend, like irony is the fabric of reality, if we don't understand this irony that is at the heart of the human being in wanting to believe that rationality is all we need. Wanting is a key word in the sense of libido, desire. If we don't understand that, then in the name of life, we're going to do anti-life. We're going to engage in practices of anti-life. But this would mean that to resist the death drive is precisely the introduction of the non-rationality of saying, well, actually, no, emotions are just as important. Actually, it's important you leave the womb. Actually, if you stay in the womb, you die. To go into emotion is to leave the womb. Because there's a way in which you don't have emotion in the womb, right? I mean, technically, yes, I understand the stress of the mother, but
you're not even distinct.
That's correct. So to go into emotion is to leave the womb. And rationality doesn't want to do that, because when you go into emotion, it's hard. And then rationality says, told you so. This is the key. So you leave rationality, go into emotion, it's hard, and your brain says, told ya, you shouldn't have left the room. And this is where the choice and agency is huge. This is where the non-rationality and the themos is big, because you look at your brain that is telling you you should have never left the womb, and you say, I do not regret my choice. And that's the stand, that's the Achilles, that's the fight, and you don't return to the womb, and you face the emotion, and you figure it out, which has this thymotic quality to it, without which there is no possibility of overcoming a meaning crisis, because you'll just do what's quote-unquote rational, move back into the womb. Just like in Japan, everyone's living in the apartments, the social capital is collapsing. All of these things, the demographic crisis, speak to returning to the womb of rationality, of which seems rational because it hurts to leave it. But if you don't leave it, you can't grow, because you can't grow inside the womb.
It's all developmentally linked, isn't it? So much of what happens here is about arrested development. We are stuck in places where we are seeking the womb, we are seeking comfort, containment, and we can use our mind to create that to some degree, right? We're trying to use our mind in a context and a society where that is being reinforced to us all the time, that that's the best thing you can do. You should be training your mind, you should be thinking more, become more rational. This is all just reinforced. And ultimately, so much of this disruption comes about because we are so motivated biologically to remain attached, our attachment drive, right, at whatever cost, right? Like at whatever cost. I just need to keep this relationship somewhat workable. When you're a child, that is somewhat workable. And it's so hardwired into us that our mind is involved in finding out all these ways and to help us to do that, to orient towards that at whatever cost. Not allowed to have this emotion with this person, never have that again, put that down there, right? Oh, it's breaking through. Here's lots and lots of anxiety to make you feel so uncomfortable that you'll do anything you can to run in the opposite direction from that emotion and use your mind to do so often. That's not working. Here's depression. Just feel nothing, right? Just be completely flattened, but you still get your attachment relationship to some degree. And then you're kind of living with this model forevermore and it never gets updated. It's like an outdated system that has nothing to do anymore, well, oftentimes has nothing to do anymore with what's going on.
I think one of the great problems is that we're still in a paradigm of right or wrong. Is this right or is this wrong? And with that, you can't start moving into these practices, these arts, these sort of processes or different things. And I think a lot on the movement in Dante from the Inferno to the Purgatorio to the Paradiso. What's very interesting in the Inferno is, a lot of like morality is like right, wrong, good, bad, right? And you see, I think basically that's all we're in ever, and our development is arrested in that kind of thinking, which is very like rational, true, false, good, bad, very binary. And I think society has a giant kind of arrested development in that. And from the Enlightenment and so on, there's a kind of collective arrested development. And you were saying at the beginning on the idea that, yeah, basically the entire sociological paradigm is one giant rational womb. That's what we're in. And you see, that's why if you start to do what's non-rational, you feel irrational because it goes against the social order. It goes against the Peter Berger plausibility structure. Like the psychoanalytical is also the social analytical. They're always feeding one another. What happens in the therapy office is happening in the work office. It all kind of interconnects because you see the human being, as we know from like Ask Conformity Experiments, Milgram, we tend to determine if we're doing what we should do based on what other people are doing. And if other people are living with traumas, we're like, well, there's something wrong with me if I don't have trauma. Or if they're arrested development, I need arrested development. So then if you step out of the social death drive, that is the collective rational drive that leads to this return to the womb of the Enlightenment, if you will, you're going to feel like you're crazy. But that precisely is what you must feel to leave the womb. It is kind of crazy to leave the womb, but it also kills you if you don't. It deadens you. So you got to do something crazy to live. And you see that what's kind of feeding all of that is we only have this kind of binary right, wrong, or different things like that. But what I think is insanely critical is that as you move into the Paradiso, there's this concept that Dante is constantly entertaining. It's like, hey, Dante, joy can kill you, by the way. If you're introduced to like joy too soon, if you do beauty too quickly, it will actually reduce you to ash. This key image. So Dante's talking with Beatrice. And he's kind of upset. He's like, Beatrice, why won't you smile? And she says, because if I did, because you yourself have not developed to the place where you can handle the fullness of God's glory, it would actually reduce you to ash, like Semele facing Zeus. And so the idea is that Beatrice has to gradually move Dante to the place where then at the top of the Paradiso, she can smile. So the idea is that joy, grace, happiness, all of these things are things that people have to be gradually introduced to because of their sins and wounds, as Dante would talk about, because of their own pains. Like if you try to introduce people too soon to the fullness of the human experience, it reduces them to ash. I think there's one part, it might be like at the beginning of the Purgatory where they run in it's like Dante's entering and there's these dancers and they run up and like, Dante, what are you doing here? And Cleo was talking about it, like, Dante, what are you doing here? Don't you know this is a place of joy? Like as if it's dangerous to be here. Yeah. And I see, and what the key is when we're talking about art, rigor of mystery, to me, what I hear in that is the rigor of Beatrice, to keep moving like Aristotle, but introduce gradually more and more mystery as he simultaneously develops in his character to receive it and to handle it, which then compels him onward like a dojo teacher to the place where he can handle the full smile and thus the fullness of the mystery. He cannot be introduced to the beatific vision until he moves to the top. If the beatific vision is introduced to him at the bottom of the paradiso, it will kill him. And there's something similar to human beings. Like the only way to experience the fullness of joy is developmentally. That's kind of the trait. Like the only way is a developmental logic. And you see, that is the logic of the Paradiso. The problem is we're stuck in the logic of the Inferno and halfway of the Purgatorio. Beatrice shows up about halfway of the Purgatorio, which means the entire social order has arrested development in a binary logic, which is great for law and basic ethics and don't murder people. But once you move beyond the don't murder people, okay, I'm not murdering my friends. What now? We don't have any idea because we don't have a social practice of Beatrice. We have a social order of don't do bad things. Okay, but how do I do good things? Don't know, but don't do bad things. You'll figure it out. Actually, I won't because I'm like weighed down by trauma in my own childhood. Well, figure it out. And we don't, of course. So we have not socially or globally transitioned from a logic of the Inferno and the Purgatorio to the logic of Beatrice, which is basically the logic of psychoanalysis and therapy. That's basically what Beatrice is the logic of working through to be able to handle the fullness of joy, because Beatrice is an art form. Beatrice, and the key too, I would also say with Beatrice, and this is true of relationships, she's literally telling Dante that if I smile too soon, heaven will kill you. It's pretty wild. See, like literally the glory of heaven is going to kill you, like a Lovecraft creature is how I put it. And so what's interesting is what are the greatest pains in people's lives usually caused by? Their loved ones, the people they care most about. That is what Beatrice is talking about, is that without the right care or the right art form, heaven is Lovecraftian. Heaven is a force of destruction. Joy will kill you. We have not thought this. We can't think this where rationality and emotion are too distinct, where mind and body are separate. What Beatrice is talking about is unthinkable under the wrong paradigm of what thinking is or what emotion is, and if we don't have the why with the dash on it, because that's basically what Beatrice is like. The why I don't smile is a dash through it. It is the movement. You have to move to the place where you can see it. You can never settle. So we were saying thought and emotion have to be a movement, a continual movement, Aristotle. That's what Beatrice is saying. And Beatrice is saying is there is a certain art to this that is possible. So the meaning crisis in a way is a lack of a Beatrice. There's no Beatrice in society. There is no social order of training people according to Beatrice. Not children, not adults, not schools, not business people. The meaning crisis can be seen as one giant collective lack of the skills of Beatrice. And the question is, what would it look like to gain those? What would it look like to do those things? Well, if we don't even know we need that beatrific, structure, you can't even begin to do that. So again, there's all these things that have to be cleared. All these ways of thinking about what thinking is that have to be cleared. If the divide between the outer and inner space, that has to be thought. If you think all of these things and you feel all of these things, well, then you can move, and I give it back to you. You can move through the logic and the life and the dance of Beatrice to the place of the beatific vision, which is where love, where the wings fail the lofty fantasy, and you see the love that moves the sun and other stars, and that is a full emotional experience. But you have to be worked to the place of that full emotional experience. And unless you're worked there, you cannot get there, thus the need for a social acknowledgement of the art of a Beatrice.
Outstanding. As you often say, outstanding. Oh, I'm so alive. You can't experience full joy, right? Full love, the fullness of the positive emotions as well. You cannot experience them to their fullest extent without being able to do the same with the other emotions. It is through the pathway of looking at the parts of us that we don't want to look at, having the full internal experience of the things inside us that might horrify us to see, right? Not to do in reality, but just the internal experience and the associated impulse that comes with it, that has been hidden under so many layers. Without the heavy work of doing that, you necessarily restrict yourself from the full experience of all the others. It's in order to then open you up to noticing that you can now have a fuller experience of the other, of a person, of a relationship, of yourself, right? Of connection. I just, the way you put that was beautiful. You have to be able to look at the horror first. You have to be able to go into the deepest pain first. And what you were talking about just the instruction over and over, just don't do bad. Just don't do bad. Don't care about anything else. You'll sort everything. Just don't do bad, right? It's so true. And then when people confuse that with don't notice anything bad inside you, like don't notice any impulse inside you that might want to do bad, that might want to hurt another person, right? Don't ever notice that impulse. Then it's also, you're on your own about everything else. But also don't you dare pay attention to your feelings, because sometimes you'll confuse that with doing bad, and that's what you're supposed to not be doing. So don't do bad with your actions. Don't pay attention to your feelings. And I don't know what else you're going to do, but just, you're on your own. Right.
The only way that Dante can get to the Paradiso is to go through Inferno. The way is blocked. There's no other way but to go through the Inferno. It is an incredibly, psychoanalytical therapeutic text, that Dante is putting forth and walking forth. And then at the end of it, the point is a beatific vision, not just a beatific thought or idea, but a full emotional experience. And that just cannot be overstated.
Yeah, that was the way you brought that together at the end, was just so robust and joyful and joyful. Yeah, I always get an immense sense of joy when I speak with you. You have a way of just bringing threads together and illuminating new threads that I kind of know are there, but I can't quite. Yeah, you have the rigor of mystery about you, which is why I always really enjoy our conversations.
Well, that's very kind of you, Aspasia, and I enjoy them as well. Well, this has been a complete delight.